Hi. Welcome, Rosanna.
Hi, thank you, Siddharth.
Everybody, we have Rosanna with us today. Rosanna is a fifth year PhD student in English creative writing,
I am.
and she has freaking three books published, and we are spotlighting her for the Graduate Student Spotlight.
Thank you so much. I'm excited
Yeah.
to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. You're always an amazing person to talk to, and
Oh,
it's just an amazing it's just great to have you here.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, she has three books published. Beat that. It's not a competition. Creative
It's
writing
really
is
not.
never a competition,
No.
and it always is.
Both can be true at once.
Oh, that is how poets think. Okay, the first one is Hiding in a Thimble. Look at this pretty cover. The second one that was published the same year, right?
Yes.
2021?
Yep.
Oh, and Imitating Light. So pretty. And the last one, the book that we are here to talk about, is In the House in the Woods. So a big shout out to Rosanna, and we are so excited to have you here, Rosanna.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
coming. Yeah. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm
Mm.
very excited to be doing this interview. Yeah, I'm trying not to blush when you talk about my poetry, but I'm very excited to be here.
I mean, you are a great poet, and
Oh,
you
thank you.
deserve all the attention and all the praise that you get.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the first question that I have for you is would you like to tell us about yourself a little and tell us about your journey towards becoming a poet?
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I feel like this is a little bit of a basic answer, but I have
Mm.
basically always wanted to be a writer, like for as long as I can remember. I would just fill up notebook after notebook of stories and poems and different things. I remember I found this notebook from when I was a really little kid, like little enough that I could not spell at all.
Hmm.
And it was about a spy, and the spy met someone else, and they were like, "We should just be friends instead of being spies." And then they moved to Jamaica, and I have no idea if I even knew where that was or what a spy does or anything, but yeah, I just always wanted to be a writer. And I remember having this really intense argument with one of my older brothers because I wrote a poem and he's like, "Well, this isn't a poem because it doesn't rhyme." And I was like, "You are wrong." Like, this is a poem because I say it's a poem. Which is funny because I feel like I was not a super self-confident kid, but that thing, I was like, "No, I am certain about this, to my core." Yeah, so I guess all my poetness came after that.
Interesting. So uh, that shows how you were very confident about what poetry is. And a lot
Yeah.
of times, people who are adults don't know what poetry is.
That's true. I know. I feel like I'm less confident about it now after doing my poetics exam in my
uh,
PhD. I'm like, what is poetry? But at 9, I was like, I know.
I know what poetry is. You want to learn poetry? Come to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I was like, I will teach you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when I was a kid, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna teach people how my younger siblings how to play cricket," and I was like a kid myself.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a childhood thing though, to be like, I am the
Yeah.
expert of this thing I just learned about.
Oh
Let me
yeah.
tell you.
Yeah. And that's probably coming to like being a part of graduate school where you just like learn that you don't know enough at all
Yeah.
times. Yeah.
Yeah, that imposter syndrome though. I'm like, do I know anything?
Do I know anything?
No.
No. No, we still know some
We
things.
know a couple
We know a
things.
couple of things. But there's no like that feeling of certainty sort of goes away
Yeah.
when you've been in graduate school for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely can.
Yeah. It's a weird experience where I feel like I've become more confident, but I've become more confident in also saying that I don't know this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is actually a good thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's good to question yourself,
Yeah.
to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes in grad school, it's really easy to fall down a spiral of imposter syndrome where you're like, I am garbage and like everything I think is stupid, but I
Mm.
like that's not healthy. And like I've
No.
definitely been more on that side of the spectrum in
Mm.
the past. But like I think it's good to be like, there are so many ideas that I haven't considered. Like I should just be open to always learning and knowing more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what brought you to OSU, and how has your experience been here?
I've had a really good experience here. I actually adjuncted for 2 years in the
Hmm.
comp program before I applied for the program. I moved here with my fiance, who's now my husband. We had just finished our MFA, and he was like, I want to go straight into the PhD. And I was like, I love that for you. I don't want to do that. I want a break. And so we moved here, and I got a job teaching because they were like, we don't have enough people to teach comp. And so I got hired the Friday before classes started.
Hmm.
And that was an adventure. Shout out to adjuncts because they
Yes.
work so hard. And in my opinion, do not get compensated adequately, but they really do a lot. So shout out to adjuncts.
To all the adjuncts, like we
Yes,
actually mean it.
no, truly,
Yeah.
like the university would not function without them. Um,
Oh, our program cannot survive without adjuncts. Yeah.
mm-mm, mm-mm.
Oh.
But yeah, but after I did that for about 2 years, I started really missing, like, feeling like
Yeah.
a writer. I feel like I love teaching, but it takes
Mm.
so much time and energy, and I felt like I was just a teacher,
Yeah.
and not a poet anymore.
Yeah.
And I really just wanted to be back in the classroom, and
Hmm.
like I felt like I wasn't getting any better at writing, like I just kind of stalled.
Yeah.
Um, so I applied for the program, and luckily they let me in. And yeah, that's
I mean, who wouldn't let you in?
it was very nice of them. I was
Uh,
like, I'm just hanging out and adjuncting. Can I please come? And they're like, okay, I guess you can. And then, I mean, as you remember, because you're
yeah.
also in your 5th year,
Yeah.
we started fall of 2020.
Wow, that was a good year to join a PhD program.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that was wild. So everything was online,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, I came here for a writing community, and I'm literally alone in my house
Oh, yeah.
with my Zoom screen. So it was kind of like a rough
Mm-hmm.
intro to the program,
Yeah.
but I feel like since then, I've really developed a community here, and I'm really grateful for all of the great writers that I've met, and also like the mentors here. I feel like I've really gotten to grow as a writer and thinker, and I'm really grateful for my time here.
It's awesome. Like, I know, like, we started in probably the worst time to start a PhD program, I think.
100% terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, yeah, a different ride for me coming as an international student. You remember, I wasn't
Yes.
even in the country.
Oh
So
my god, that must have been rough.
it was, but it was also like it gave me an opportunity to, I think, ease myself into
Yeah.
the program, I think, and it was very beneficial. I think the program has a lot to offer, and specifically, it kind of was amazing for me to like coming as a student who had not had this kind of opportunity before,
Yeah.
and to experience that was like just spectacular. And the program offered so much. So I was just like, whoa, this is really nice, but I hate the fact that I'm not there.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I went in a classroom in person was more than a year after I joined the program.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had not met my advisor at the point until I was in, she was my advisor in person, and until like it was fall of next year. So it was just
Yeah, it was
crazy.
just such a strange time to like be a person and be a
Oh,
student and like try to and like the first year of a grad program like sucks anyway. Like it's so
oh,
hard and you're trying
oh,
to like adjust and then like I can't even imagine like I was already living here like and still felt like this huge transition but like moving from another country I can't even
yeah.
imagine. And I know they like I feel like they make international students jump through a lot of loopholes and things too.
Yeah, it's not the best experience in that sense.
Yeah.
Like there's always anxiety about what happens, but it's okay. Like COVID is such a thing that we can talk about, and we can have another podcast on it,
Yeah.
or we can
Yes.
have a whole recording of graduate student experience. But
Literally.
I want to ask you more about your reading and writing. So, like,
Yeah.
who were sort of your influences of reading and writing growing up?
Yeah. So growing up, I really just gravitated towards any book about a smart girl. Like if it had a smart girl as the main character, I was
Hmm.
like, I am her, she is me.
Hmm.
This is all I want to read. Anna Green Gables, of course, like a girl that like talks too much and is really smart. I was like, oh yes, me. And then Little Women, of course, I really wanted to be Jo March.
Hmm.
Jane Eyre, which I definitely read when I was like way too young to like know what was actually happening in that book. I think I read it when I was like 11, and I was like, I love this book. But yeah, those are some like standouts. We
Yeah.
also had this like really old, like dusty tome of like Shakespeare plays.
Yeah.
And I remember reading them when I was like pretty young, and like I had no idea
Hmm.
what it meant, but I remember being like, it sounds so beautiful. And I think I like really just sort of like fell in love with like language and the way language can like feel a certain way, even if you don't like completely understand what it means.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about growing up and learning to love language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of broadens imagination so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And who do you think has sort of influenced your work now in terms of like specifically uh, in the house in the woods?
Yeah. So I think reading other poets is always so inspiring to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing makes me feel like writing more than like reading poets that I just absolutely love. A couple of poets that I've read recently that have really inspired me are like Emily Skaja and her collection Brute, which is just it's so good. And Joy Harjo, who is someone that I had read like a little bit of, but I've been getting more into her. Then Anne Carson is like sort of my forever, always coming back to her. But for this book in particular, I think I was even more inspired by like some feminist theorists
Mm-hmm.
that I had been reading for different classes, specifically Donna Haraway and her collection, or her book. Collection is more of like a poetry term, but her book, Staying with the Trouble. And she has this idea in there about like tentacular thinking and how it's really important to think about like all the ways that everything we do and everyone we interact with and like including nature, right,
Mm-hmm.
is like tangled up in itself.
Mm. Interesting.
And I think that really impacted how I thought
Yeah.
about this book, which is a lot about like grief and family and gender to some degree, and how all of these things are like so enmeshed that you can't really pull them apart. You can just like look at that braid a little closer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that you bring up grief because that's the main theme of the work.
Yeah.
And the book is primarily about grieving a loved one.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry for your loss. And it's
Thank you.
uh, very hard to go through something like that and then write about it. But one of the things that stood out to me was this kind of entangled experience of grief and loss, because it was not just that you're grieving the loss of a person, but also there is sort of mourning of the self,
Hmm.
the world around you, the child, your childhood. And it just felt like everything was just like grief feels like a burden a lot of times.
Yeah.
Loss, it's like it just hangs on to you. So
Hmm.
everything just sort of comes together in your work. How do you think about different elements coming in like that and merging with the grief?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that kind of comes across in the book because that's definitely, I think, how I was feeling when I
Yeah.
was writing these poems. And I think grief is very strange in that it really feels like you are different after you are grieving someone. Um, And I think I was feeling that really strongly when I was writing these poems. So it's like, yes, I lost my sister, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she's gone now, but also like I lost the version of me that existed when she was alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so this collection is really about kind of going back and like interrogating all of these like different relationships and sort of trying to like map myself back
Yeah.
together, if that makes sense. Um it's funny reading the book now because I wrote these poems like probably like a year and a half ago now. And so like I've had a little bit of distance
Mm-hmm.
or no, I guess really longer, like 2.5 years ago is when I wrote a lot of these. And so like I'm not in the same space
Mm-hmm.
now that I was when I wrote them. Um, so that's also like an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, I mean, to me, like it was very clear that it's not just about that one particular loss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's just how we are trained to think in in graduate school. It could also be a symptom of that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean I think it goes back to that like idea of like the tentacular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing is ever just one thing. Nothing
Yeah.
happens in a vacuum. And I think that's very important. I
Yeah.
heard this thing recently on a podcast
Yeah.
actually, where this person was saying that like grief is what happens so that our love doesn't go to waste.
Mm.
Um, and I really like I've just been sitting with that since I learned it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like this is what we do. This is how we make sense of grief, is we keep untangling and tangling, and that's kind of the work of like being a person.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful thing to say. Yeah, I agree. Um, so one of the things that really stood to me about grief in particular and your depiction of it was the use of nature imagery.
Hmm.
There is so much, like it was like everywhere. There is nature is so overwhelmingly present in these
Hmm.
in this collection. And in particular, like what stands out to me is sort of like one of the things I was asking myself is like, what's the sort of the relationship between grief and nature? Is being in Anthropocene, sort of, which because your poetry feels, even though it's about again a person's loss, but it feels very ecologically conscious.
Mm.
So is that kind of grief very inherent to the experience of living in the Anthropocene?
I love that question. I think for me it was so like personal, my like connection to nature in this collection, because so many of the poems are about like childhood, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was really feeling that distance from where I grew up in like rural upstate New York, which is a very
Yeah.
different vibe than living in Oklahoma. Like I really miss trees and like greenness.
I do
Not that
mystery.
there aren't trees here,
I
but
miss
like
birds.
oh yeah.
There are not enough birds.
And like seasons feel very different here. Like
We can experience 5 seasons in one day.
yes. And none of them are winter. Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? But yeah, so I think like my own like homesickness
Yeah.
for like a space like kind of got mapped
Mm.
onto landscape in this collection. But I really love that like there is the room and possibility for that reading of like, oh yeah, also the planet is dying and
Yeah.
we are all grieving that right now and always. Um, which is something I think a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if sort of even subconsciously that's in there.
Yeah, it kind of like opens readers to that experience of
Hmm.
being enmeshed with the environment, and like the environment is so starkly different from the kind of absolute distance that we live in with nature a lot of times. And even the collection is like in the house in the woods.
Yeah.
So in some ways there's a proximity to the house in the woods, but there's also like a distance
Hmm.
embedded in like the house in the woods.
Yeah, and I think like a fracturing
Yeah.
too. The title comes from a poem in the collection, and it's sort of like each stanza is this own
Mm-hmm.
like vignette, like in the house, in the woods, in the barn,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of this like fracturing of self, but
Yeah.
also fracturing of place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, another thing that is very interesting about this is like, and it goes along, I think, nature quite well, is the use of myths and legends.
Yes.
And it seems that the poem is like, the collection is just, it's trying to rewrite some of those myths that exist. So, how do you reflect on that?
Yeah, I think that's part of like the fun of being a writer
Yeah.
and a feminist poet too, is that like, you know, not that we necessarily have a responsibility to rewrite myth, but that we have the opportunity to
Yeah.
go back in and be like, okay, like who are these characters that we
Mm-hmm.
maybe don't hear from as much, or like who have been given less agency in the tellings. So like Persephone, for
Yeah.
example, shows up in some of these poems, and just sort of thinking about the way we treat these characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the magic of poetry is
Yeah.
that any figure you use in the universe of the poem gets to be like equally real. So
Mm.
like there's like a super long poem towards the end of this,
Oh, yeah, the
and
longest poem.
it's the
Oh,
longest poem
yeah.
I've ever written. It's so long. I don't
Yeah.
think I'll ever write one that long again. But
Come on, we need an epic poem from
oh
you.
god.
It'll be
No,
great.
I'll leave the epics to someone more epic. But it was fun to write, and so like Persephone is in it, and like some
Yeah.
cartoon Disney princesses are in
Yeah.
it, and real people as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion get like a
Mm.
shout out in this poem, and like everybody kind of gets to be on this equal playing
Mm.
field, which I
Yeah.
think is really fun to mess
Interesting.
with.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, how that is enmeshed with the childhood experience.
Hmm.
So, like, were you like an avid reader of sort of myths and legends growing up?
I was,
Uh,
because I'm queer and a writer, so I was obsessed with like fairy tales
uh,
and myths and Greek myth
uh,
and all of it. And I also had a very active imagination and like not necessarily a super good like separation of like what is
mm,
real and what is not real.
mm.
I was like one of those kids that like believed in fairies for like a really long time. But
How long?
I'm not. I'm not gonna. I plead the fifth. I'm not gonna say, but way too long. And I feel like that was also very important to like my
Yeah.
construction of self was like these
Yeah.
stories where I could like see myself or see qualities that I even wanted to have,
Mm-hmm.
and be like, okay, that is me. I can map myself onto this. And so it was fun writing this book and almost doing this like reverse mapping where it's like, okay, now how do I get to change this? Now how do I get to like tweak it into my own sort of self mythologizing?
It's interesting because it feels like it can be, of course, a myth, and like how characters can inspire that. But
Hmm.
at the same time, it feels like we still do it in some ways.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's like, we look up to scholars and we think of becoming like them, or poets or writers, and there's always that
absolutely.
kind of like, we're always creating that kind of story and narrative arcs about ourselves to be
Yeah.
that person. Yeah.
I mean, even if you think about something like BuzzFeed quizzes, right? Like
Yeah.
a which
Absolutely.
character from Gilmore Girls am I? Which character from, you know, whatever am
Yeah.
I? Like we love, I think just as humans, we love telling stories to
Hmm.
ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah.
Um yeah. I just think that's a very deeply human thing to be like, how can I understand myself better? What can I map onto my life?
Oh, yeah, we're nothing if not stories.
Oh,
That's the thing we
100%.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best thing we do. uh Telling stories to ourselves, and how there are a lot of people who tell a lot of other stories to themselves, and sometimes they can be pretty damning to other people.
Hmm.
And I'm specifically talking about the political here.
Yes.
Yeah. uh, and it seems that the political in your work is ever present, even in grief, even in myths, even in, um, nature imagery, and sort of it just feels that there's a strong tendency to write about yourself, even though it's about yourself, there seems to be an association with the political, and it
Mm-hmm.
mostly comes across with relationships with the family members and yourself
Mm-hmm.
and the body. So how do you think about it, given the relationship of your work with the political, and what kind of like impact it has on you as a poet?
Yeah. I mean, part of me just thinks it's inevitable because like the political is ever present.
Yeah.
Like I always go back to the like very cliche but very
Yeah.
true Adrian Rich quote, like the personal is political. And I think in anybody who is in any way marginalized like really feels that, and you feel that
Mm-hmm.
like in your body, um that politics are always about what we can or cannot do,
Mm-hmm.
who gets to be fed, who gets to be housed, like what does
Mm-hmm.
that look like?
Yeah.
And that feels always deeply political to me.
Yeah.
I feel like right now, I don't know, tell me if you agree with this, but it seems like there is a real effort to depoliticize issues right now, or like to
Mm.
act like some issues are not political when they seem to me very obviously political,
Yeah.
and it
Sorry.
makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I feel like, of course, there's a big tendency at all times to depoliticize because it helps the people in power to
Hmm.
retain their power. And the best ideology is when it's not visible, when people can't tell its ideology.
Right.
So that's when it works at its best.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And when like discomfort becomes a tool of oppression, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like if a group in power gets to be like, well, the way you are as a person makes me uncomfortable, and
Yeah.
therefore like you are being political by making me
Yeah.
uncomfortable, even if that's just like your
Yeah.
queer identity, right?
Yeah.
And that's something you have no control over,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but other people get to kind of write that story onto you,
Yeah.
and I think that is dangerous.
And
And
the
yeah.
other side to it, like comfort of being in a bubble of social media and digital technology in some
Hmm.
ways, and the kind of algorithms, the way they work, we are always surrounded in these spaces where we don't really have enough interaction with the other in some ways, and we're
Mm.
constantly othering, because and that's how discomfort is generated through our comfort, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, like, we sometimes have this idea that being uncomfortable is harmful to us, and it's
Hmm.
actually not. I
Being
think
uncomfortable.
yeah,
Hmm.
like it doesn't actually physically harm you to be uncomfortable. I work in a public library,
Yeah.
and so I see sometimes a lot that like playing out among like different patrons,
Mm-hmm.
um because of like white privilege and like
Yeah.
different things where people are like, well, I like deserve to always be comfortable in this space, but I'm like, but also this is a public space, and like
Yeah.
people are going to be here and being themselves, and like you kind of have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But sorry, I'm kind of like losing the thread here a
No,
little, but
it's all good.
yeah.
We're not supposed to follow a single thread. It's
Yeah,
always good
yeah.
to go around things. And it's interesting that you mentioned discomfort to me, because there is something deeply capitalist about seeking comfort in
Mm-hmm.
everything that we do. And nobody can be forever comfortable. Like discomfort,
Right.
and we are supposed to be, we're supposed to interact with the uncomfortable in life.
Yeah,
Yeah. At least that's what graduate school teaches you.
this is true.
Yeah, we live in the uncomfortable. Everybody, if you come to graduate school, be ready.
Yeah.
There are going to be a lot of uncomfortable times. But so next, I want to ask you this, and it's probably early, but how do you reflect on your journey as a poet who has 3 books published, more coming soon?
Not for a while, but
Mm,
I I just feel like I've been very lucky. Like I
yeah.
feel like I have found myself in really amazing writing communities. Lucky enough to be married to
Mm-hmm.
an excellent poet, so I have a live-in poet all the
Mm-hmm.
time, which is great. Um, yeah, I just feel like I have been really lucky to be like submerged in this community and this culture where I get to just work on my writing and think about what it means to be a poet and how to do a better job at that.
Yeah, absolutely. That that's very interesting. And what's next for you as a poet and as a person?
So, as a poet, I
Mm-hmm.
am working on a chapbook right
Mm-hmm.
now. So, I have the two full lengths are In the House in the Woods
Mm-hmm.
and Hiding in a Thimble, and then Imitating Light is a chapbook. So, it's a
Yep.
little bit shorter. And I'm working on another chapbook, which is a series of persona poems
Mm-hmm.
about Dragon from Shrek. Because I'm
Very
so
cute.
mad that she doesn't get to talk, and I wanted to
Oh,
write some poems imagining what she might have to say if she did get to
wow.
talk.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about it. And then I'm also working on a creative nonfiction essay,
Mm-hmm.
which is very much outside of my comfort zone
Yeah.
because I usually only write poetry.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot about like fatness and femininity and how like size gets mapped onto how we think about gender.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm still working on it, but I think there's some stuff in there that I want to explore.
That's fascinating. It's all about learning, I guess,
Yeah.
and writing in different forms. It's very
Yes.
challenging.
It is.
Yeah. I remember I started off reading more poetry and it was just such a hard transition to start reading fiction.
Yes.
I don't know why people don't talk about it as much.
I don't know. It's so hard. Like
Uh,
after studying for my exam and just being like all poetry all the time,
mm-hmm.
I was trying to read a novel and I was like, "Oh my god, get to the point." Like I've
Yeah.
been reading for pages and pages. But
Yeah.
it's like working a muscle, you just got to build it back up. So,
Yeah. It takes time and
yeah.
it takes time for all of us, I guess. Uh, Before you go, would you
Yes.
like to read a couple of poems for us?
I would love to.
Okay.
I am going to read one from the beginning and one from the end. This first one is called Queen Anne's Lace. I see them along the highway for miles before I recognize them. Their white crowns dip up and down on spindled stems, delicate carrot top leaves. The Adirondack Mountains dip up and down beneath me. I try to unsee a dead coyote. Returns are like this, swallowing the fear that the mountain is trying to buck me from it and lap up the dizzy view instead. Glut my eyes on flowers, drive another 40 miles. I have never written an origin story before. That's not true. I have never written one I could corroborate. My memories swan dive from car windows, even when I'm with my sisters and we say, remember when, as if there were a balloon tether that could hold us, a dandelion chain for wishes, or else. It goes like this. I am driving home to see my mother, and it is mid July. I am driving home, and there are flowers on the highway. I am driving up 81 North, and the flowers are Queen Anne's lace. I picked them for fairies when I was small. There is a dead coyote, but I don't see it. I do see the coyote, but he is alive, an omen. The coyote is dead, and I see his furred bones. I wonder if the fairies will eat or bury him. I have 5 sisters, and they all played pretend with me on the farm we grew up on in northern New York. No one believes the beginning of this story, the part where we are born in the woods and stayed there. Found fairy circles and left them undisturbed and unsalted. I come home to visit, and I think the trees have missed me. I feel a gnawing in my bark bones. I try to pretend I missed them too. The road is still light, and the toll booths are counting, telling me to hurry, hurry, hurry across another county, another river to town. My mother calls to tell me to hurry safely. My sisters are waiting for me, and I am close. I will beat the dark this time, but still watch for deer along the side of the road. Imagine their knees in the stems and grass. I'm sure they can scent death on the fur. The pixie joy of a roadside burial. My headlights do a small dance on the coyote's bones as I exit. And then I'm also going to read one towards the end of the book. And this one is called Shell with Bog and Ghost. Imagine you are a hermit crab. Only you have lost your shell home and now use anything small enough to steal away on foot. Walnut or creamer cup, bottle cap or leaf. As you sleep, the edges of your borrowed house pinch your skin. You cannot return or rest or fold your legs around yourself like a prayer. This is how grief feels, you tell your remaining sisters. There are parts you can't find your way back to. Everywhere there is a terrible irritation. The sounds of another day burning your theft hands, sand stuck between cartilage joints. Your unborn daughter, only possible, listens inside her own temporary shell, curled in on herself, a seahorse buoyed against coral. You know she hears you, burying a mother you might have been. You've already ransacked another home.
Thank you. It
Thank
was
you.
beautiful.
Thanks.
You're such a beautiful poet. Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much for coming and reading your work and sharing experiences.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This is so lovely.
Yeah, and anybody who does not know this, we had a ton of technical problems before. So it took us quite a while to get here. So we're very happy.
We're so proud of
We're so proud
ourselves.
of ourselves. It was quite a journey today. But thank you so much for listening to us, and we are very excited that we'll get to present more graduate students and highlight their work to you. Uh, Tune in the next time. Please remember to like and share this video and subscribe our channel. See you next time. Bye.